The rectory is alive.
And I can sense it waiting.
Borley Rectory, The Awakening, directed by Stephen M. Smith. It's a 2025 true life ghost story movie. Now, Stephen M. Smith has actually directed 2 previous movies based in Borley Rectory, which was a real place in the UK, which was apparently haunted. These movies are not connected though. You don't need to have seen the previous movies. They are all separate movies, just ghost stories in and around the real life Borley Rectory, which was burnt down in mysterious circumstances some years ago. So what's this one? This one stars Julian Glover and Patsy Kensit, albeit they are in smaller supporting roles, and takes place during the end of the 19th century to the beginning of the early 20th century. And it follows this family which move into this rectory, and they are kind of administering it. The elderly father, played by Julian Glover, he is basically the kind of the patriarch of the family, and he was the original administrator, so to speak. But he passes away, leaves it to his son primarily, and they are not quite as into faith as he was, and as such they are messing around with stuff and kind of disturb these sort of dormant ghosts of a nun and also a priest, and these two are at odds with one another, you might say. The priest being particularly kind of wicked, and now this threatens this family that are now living there. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. It's fair to say, I would suggest, that this movie straddles the line between a low budget version of The Conjuring meets Downton Abbey. That's the best way I would kind of describe the premise. It is a period movie. Let's discuss what I think works in this movie's favour. Okay, now it is obviously a lower budget movie, and we have to have this expectation when watching a film like this, because you are not going to get the production value of the Conjuring movies, or Downton Abbey for that matter. That being said, I will say I think there's a nice effort here in having this as a period piece, both with the way the characters are kind of depicted, the way they're written, and things like hair, makeup. Our kind of our new administrator, this young guy who looks like a kind of Timothy Chalamet kind of looking dude. He's got these big chunky sideburns and stuff. I mean, they're clearly glued on, but I appreciate the effort. The haircuts and all of that sort of thing, the hair and makeup. I thought it was actually, again, providing we could look at this with a low budget lens, a pretty good kind of period movie here. And it's obviously being filmed at this kind of quite a nice kind of location, and we're going to get a few exterior shots and things like this. And even in the interiors, I've got to say, they look the part of this kind of time period. And you can imagine this is the kind of the Borley Rectory and things like this. Now, this movie is not going to be for everyone in regards to pacing. It is a slower paced movie. How to describe it? And it's kind of like a classic English haunting. You might look at it in the same way you would look at a kind of like a BBC production of like a Christmas ghost story. It kind of reminds me of that sort of thing, a kind of classic English literature kind of haunting tale. It's not a Christmas movie, it's not over that kind of period or anything like that, but it just reminds me of these kind of ghost stories that you quite often see on television over kind of the Christmas period and things like this, these period dramas. And it's kind of quite refreshing in some ways compared to the more bombastic style of like American style kind of haunted house movies. It's a gentler movie. It is more about the kind of these characters dealing with the haunting and the kind of the realization about what's happening and how they problem solve during this kind of time period to try and deal with it, compared to having out and out kind of scares and things like this. So, you know, it is a slower paced movie, but deliberately so, and I think it works if you are, you know, of that kind of fan of movies and TV shows like that. So it's a gentler movie in that respect. I gotta say, I mean, there are a couple of times where I thought the acting was a little bit wobbly, but for the most part, I think the acting is fairly sort of strong here. Again, when you look at this through, this is clearly not a massively huge production or anything like that, but I kind of believe the sort of the characters in their roles, and when you couple it with the kind of the trying to be somewhat truthful to the time period in regards to the costuming and the makeup and the hair and everything, I think the kind of the way these characters are kind of the lines are delivered, I actually thought it was pretty strong in regards to the acting for the most part. Like I said, there's a couple of times where, okay, the acting isn't perfect from everyone, but I would say it's better more times than it's not. There are actually some pretty decent shots in this movie. I actually quite like some of the direction here, and we do actually capture some pretty effective, like creepy sort of sequences, not in regards to anything like supernatural special effects, but just the way this kind of this location is shot during the kind of the night scenes and things like this. Makes for some kind of quite nice cinematography here and there, not all throughout the movie, but certainly I think it delivers some kind of creepier imagery whilst this kind of movie has been filmed. In regards to the kind of the supernatural stuff, this is where the budget does start to show through a little bit, I will say, and we'll come onto it again in the negatives. But nonetheless, I do think there's a couple of occasions where I think, it's sort of creepy without being out and out kind of scary. The movie does sort of an okay job, I think, of giving you this kind of like the backstory. And there's a couple of times where, this movie is on the creepier side without being out and out scary. This is kind of a movie that you could probably watch with younger people without it being like a particularly kind of like scary movie, which leads me into what doesn't work. I think this movie could have upped the kind of the scare factor a bit. It's maybe a little bit too gentle. I think some of this is down to the way our ghostly characters are filmed. We do see them in daylight, which always I think is a little bit of a risky move in a kind of a horror film. I guess you could arguably say it sort of undercuts that spooky imagery where we see, which looks like just someone in a costume like over there. But anyway, yeah, so there's a few scenes when they're in daylight, but even when they're during the night, as I said, there's a couple of scenes where I think it looks eerie but never scary. I mean, these ghostly apparitions are just people in costumes and filmed without any type of VFX, and this is one instance where I do feel, you could have had a little bit of like Adobe effects, kind of like smoke coming off them, looking at them a little bit ethereal, maybe a little bit kind of translucent or something like that, or a little bit of a glow to them. It just kind of looks like people in a costume without really being ethereal at all. So there it is. It's not a particularly kind of like scary movie in any respect. And I would go one step further. I think some of the kind of the makeup that is used is a little on the weaker side. They're made up to kind of look a little bit sort of scary sometimes. And I would even go as far as to say some of the makeup in regards to the horror makeup, it kind of ends up looking a little goofy. I'm not going to lie. There's a time here where it's just like people have got dirty faces rather than anything else. I mean, would it have killed them to made them look a little bit sort of skeletal or something like that? That would have been a little bit more effective. I mean, even if you're going to be having him in like the corporeal form, like you did with the Nun films, for example, at least make them look a little bit, rather than just like dirty humans, to be honest with you. There's a couple of times we've got glowing eyes and stuff and a little bit of blood, but not much. That's where you do see the kind of the budget kind of start to kind of, you know, come away a little bit. The acting, as I've mentioned, I think is fine for the level of movie that this is, but there are still a couple of performances that are on the weaker side, and you know, if you are expecting fantastic top tier acting throughout this movie, I personally feel it's fine, but there are some times where the line delivery seems a little bit sort of, it could have been done with a couple more takes. But I personally feel the acting is actually, for the most part, okay. The pacing, again, this is not necessarily, I feel, trying to be an out-and-out scary movie more than an eerie movie, but arguably you could say the pacing of this movie is a little bit on the kind of the slow side for some. And I think if you had up the kind of the scary moments when we had them, maybe you could have got away with the you know, the pace of this movie being a little bit slower in parts, because even when we do get the kind of like the action, so to speak, it's on the gentler side, and as such the movie's pacing as a whole does feel maybe a little bit slow for some. You could arguably say as well, the movie doesn't have a specially original plot or anything like that. It more or less feels like a plot you can kind of guess where it's going to go without really being too original in regards to kind of plotting or anything like that. Overall, however, I would say if you are a fan of a gentler, slower moving English style haunting, then you can do a lot worse with this one. I would say it's a fair to good one-time watch. I don't know if it has a particularly a good amount of rewatchability, to be honest with you. But I would suggest, if you don't mind, like I say, a lower budget kind of version of a haunting movie, then it's a decent one-time watch. I'll give it an above average score of 6 out of 10. What were your thoughts? If you've seen it, please let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.